The disabled alien princess walked into the wrong room. Only the human told her to stay. It was the pride of the Terran Federation, a massive vessel equipped with the latest technology designed for diplomatic missions across the galaxy. Today, it was hosting an important summit, one that could decide the fate of the galaxy. The Terrans were meeting with the Zarni's Empire, a race known for their advanced technology, vast wealth, and formidable military force. If the talks went well, peace would be secured. If they failed, war was all but certain. Princess Selka of Zarnis had come to the regent's crown not just as a royal representative, but as someone who had been thrust into the role of leader far too soon. She was the youngest of the royal family, and though she had been born with the privilege of being a princess, her life had not been without its challenges. For one, Selka was disabled. A genetic condition had left her unable to walk, and she relied on a floating hoverchair to move around. It was a rare condition among her people, and though Zarnis was a technologically advanced society, even they could not cure it. For years, Selka had been treated as fragile, even by those who cared for her. Many saw her as a symbol of weakness, someone who would never rule, who would never command respect. But Selka was not like her siblings, who had always known they would one day sit on the throne. She had been thrust into politics when her elder brothers and sisters had either died or been killed in a series of political conflicts. Now, she found herself alone, trying to lead a vast empire that was on the brink of war. Her hoverchair hummed quietly as she navigated the long, sterile hallways of the regent's crown. She had been here for days, meeting with Terran diplomats, discussing the finer points of the peace treaty, but nothing seemed to be going according to plan. The discussions had been tense, and while both sides wanted peace, it felt as though there was something beneath the surface that neither wanted to address. Selka's mind raced with thoughts of her family, her empire, and the delicate position she found herself in. She longed for a moment of peace, just a few minutes where she could stop thinking about everything. She had been to so many meetings, had smiled and nodded through hours of diplomatic talk, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. She turned a corner and found herself standing in front of a door she didn't recognize. Her eyes narrowed. She had never seen this part of the ship before, but before she could think about it any further, the door slid open in front of her. She hesitated, unsure of what to do, but before she could back away, a voice called out from within. "Can I help you?" Selka blinked, startled by the sound of a human voice. She had seen humans before, of course, diplomats, soldiers, engineers, but she had never spoken to one outside of formal meetings. The voice was calm, warm, and strangely enough, not at all surprised to see her. She peered into the room. The man who spoke to her was standing near a desk, his back to her. He was tall, with short-cropped brown hair and a uniform she recognized as that of a lieutenant in the Terran military. But what caught her attention more than his appearance was the way he stood. He didn't seem stiff or nervous, as so many people did when addressing royalty. Instead, he appeared relaxed, almost casual, as if she was just another person to him. The human turned around, his face breaking into a friendly smile. "You're in the wrong room, princess," he said, his tone easy. "But don't worry, you're welcome to stay. I don't mind the company." Selka blinked, unsure of how to respond. Her first instinct was to remind him of her status, to make it clear that she was a princess, a royal figure, someone who should be treated with respect. But for some reason, the words wouldn't come. She had been used to being treated as fragile, as delicate, but this man was looking at her as if she was no different than anyone else. And it made her feel strange. I didn't mean to intrude," she said, her voice soft, unsure. I wasn't sure where I was going." The human nodded, not at all flustered. "It's fine. The ship can be a maze, but if you're looking for a place to relax, I've got a decent view out the window. Not bad for a soldier's quarters, I'd say." Selka hesitated. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been in a room like this before. This was supposed to be a diplomatic vessel, not a place where someone like her should feel comfortable. But something about his easygoing demeanor was making her feel more at ease than she had in days. "Thank you," she said quietly, allowing herself to roll into the room. The man, Lieutenant Adrian Walker, as she would soon learn, moved aside to give her space. She glanced around. The room was modest, but the view from the large window was spectacular. The stars stretched out in front of her, endless and serene. It was a sight she had seen countless times, but for some reason, seeing it from this room at this moment made her feel small. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her feel connected to everything around her. "I'm Adrian," he said, settling into a chair by the desk. "I don't usually entertain royalty, but I think we can make an exception this time." Selka couldn't help but smile. There was something about his tone, the way he spoke, that made her feel like she was just another person. For once, she wasn't being treated as an object of pity, but as someone worth talking to. "I'm Selka," she replied, her voice a little steadier now. "Princess Selka of Zarnes." Adrian raised an eyebrow, but his smile never faltered. "Nice to meet you, Princess. I've heard a lot about you, most of it good, I think." Selka raised her own eyebrow, feeling a bit curious. "What exactly have you heard?" "Oh, you know," he said with a shrug, "that you're brilliant, a natural leader, that you've managed to hold together an empire even though you've got, well, you know, the condition." Selka's face stiffened. She wasn't used to hearing people talk about her disability so openly. Most people either ignored it or treated her like a fragile object, but Adrian's words didn't feel cruel. They felt like, well, like the truth. It was something she had never quite been able to accept, but it was real. She was disabled, and it affected her even if it didn't define her. "I suppose that's one way to put it," she said, her voice quieter now, "but I don't want to be remembered just for my disability." Adrian nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it, but it's not easy, right? Having people constantly remind you of what you can't do." Selka's eyes flickered with something like surprise. "You understand," he shrugged again. "I'm human, we all have our own battles, don't we?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Selka looked out at the stars, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. She had never expected a conversation like this, not in this place, not with someone like him. But there was something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like she wasn't alone. Finally, Adrian spoke again, breaking the silence. "If you want to stay, Princess, you're more than welcome. You're not an intruder here." Selka turned to face him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She had no idea where this conversation would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. The days aboard the Regent's Crown blurred together. Selka's schedule was packed with endless meetings, formal dinners, and discussions about the peace treaty. The Terran diplomats were smart, calculated, and meticulous, and the Zarnes delegation was no different. They all knew what was at stake, a fragile peace that could collapse in an instant if any of the smallest details were overlooked. But each evening, when the day's work was done, Selka found herself returning to the same room, the one where she had met Lieutenant Adrian Walker. At first, she had told herself it was just a way to escape the tension of the summit. She needed a break from the constant political pressure. But soon, the room began to feel less like an escape and more like a refuge. Adrian never treated her like a princess. He didn't look at her with pity or reverence. There were no formalities or speeches. He was simply Adrian, human, straightforward, and often blunt. They would talk about everything and nothing. He would tell her stories about his time on the Regent's Crown, his years as a soldier, and the oddities of Terran life. She, in turn, would talk about her childhood, her studies, and the struggles she faced growing up as a disabled royal in a society that valued strength above all else. It was strange, really. Selka had always been told that she was different, that she had to be exceptional in everything she did to make up for what she lacked. But Adrian made her feel as if she were just normal, just human. There were no high expectations in his eyes, no judgments. Just a quiet respect and sometimes a shared laugh. One evening, as Selka entered his quarters, she found Adrian sitting by the window, his eyes on the stars. He seemed lost in thought, his hand resting on the arm of his chair. He didn't notice her at first. She hovered by the door, wondering if she should just leave him to his silence, but something inside her urged her to stay. After a moment, Adrian turned his head, noticing her presence. His lips quirked into a half-smile. "You're early today," he said casually. "I was hoping you might have a new story," she replied with a small smile of her own. Adrian chuckled and waved her over. All right, you're here, so I'll tell you something, but only if you promise not to laugh." Selka raised an eyebrow. "I'm not the one who told you to stay in the wrong room, remember?" He laughed again, the sound light and easy. It was a sound she had grown to enjoy, though she had never fully understood why. There was something comforting about it, something that made the weight of her responsibilities feel just a little bit lighter. "I'm not sure you'll think it's funny," Adrian said, shaking his head. You see, when I was stationed on a different ship a few years back, I had a crew member who insisted that she could talk to animals. I thought she was crazy, but she swore she could communicate with every creature on the ship. Seriously? Selka asked, her curiosity piqued. How? Well, she said she had this special connection with them, he explained, and that she could understand their thoughts. So one day, when we were docking, she tried to have a conversation with the station's security droid. The droid just stared at her for 10 minutes before saying, "I do not compute this information," and walking away. Selka laughed, unable to help herself. It wasn't just the absurdity of the story that amused her. It was the way Adrian told it, as if it was just another ordinary day. She could almost picture it in her mind, the droid's blank stare, the crew members' frustration. It was a rare moment of lightness in an otherwise heavy atmosphere. Did she ever try to talk to the animals again? She asked, still smiling. Of course, Adrian replied with a grin, but I think she learned her lesson. After that, she stuck to talking to the ship's AI. At least the AI could respond without judgment. Selka found herself laughing even harder, her laughter echoing through the room. For a few moments, it felt like nothing else existed beyond the simple joy of a shared story of connection. But then the laughter faded and the silence returned, heavier this time. Selka felt the weight of her position press down on her just as it always did. She was a princess, a leader, a symbol. The expectations that others had of her were unyielding, and the pressures she carried were immense. She could never fully escape it, no matter how much she enjoyed the easy moments with Adrian. Adrian, sensing the change in her mood, gave her a questioning look. "What's on your mind?" Selka hesitated. She had never been one to burden others with her worries, especially not someone like Adrian. But for some reason, she found herself compelled to answer. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The summit, the peace talks, my people, I'm supposed to be their future, their hope, but all I see is a broken empire, my brothers and sisters. They were all stronger than me. They never had to worry about being treated like I am, and now I'm the one left to hold everything together." Adrian didn't speak right away. He simply watched her, his gaze steady. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "You're still here," he said quietly. "You're still standing. You're doing it whether you realize it or not." Selka looked up at him, surprised by the calm certainty in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, "you've had more obstacles thrown at you than most people will ever face. You didn't ask for any of this, and yet here you are facing it head-on. That's more than most people can say. It's not about being perfect. It's about being strong enough to keep going, even when everything feels impossible." For a long time, Selka didn't say anything. She simply let his words sink in, letting them settle in the quiet space between them. She wasn't sure if Adrian fully understood what she was going through, but somehow his words felt true. "What if I fail?" she finally asked, her voice small. "What if I can't keep this peace? What if I don't live up to their expectations?" Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations, Selka. You just have to do what's right for you. And if you make mistakes along the way, that's okay. Everyone does. The important thing is that you keep trying. You're stronger than you think." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Selka felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this. She had someone by her side, someone who saw her as more than just a disabled princess, more than just a symbol of weakness. She was Selka, someone capable of more than she had ever believed. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days following Selka's conversation with Adrian felt both like a lifetime and just a moment. The summit had grown more intense, and the pressure on her shoulders weighed heavier with every passing hour. Every word she spoke in the council chambers seemed scrutinized under a magnifying glass. Every decision, every gesture, watched by the eyes of her people, the Terrans and the diplomats in the room. There was no room for error, no room for weakness. But despite the constant stress of the summit, she found herself returning to Adrian's room each evening, seeking the comfort of a place where she could just be herself, free from the endless expectations. Adrian never pressured her to talk about the summit or the peace talks. He never asked her about the weight of her title. Instead, they spoke about anything and everything else. His days growing up in a small town on Earth, her childhood in the Czarny's palace, the difference between Terran food and Czarny's cuisine, and even the strange little creatures that roamed the ship. These moments became her escape, even if only for a short while. One evening, as she entered his room, Selka found Adrian standing near the window again, his back to her. He was looking out at the stars, his expression distant. "Adrian," she called softly. He turned to her, his face lighting up with a smile. "Princess, what brings you here today?" His tone was playful, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had been working non-stop, just like her, preparing for the summit, managing the intricate web of diplomatic relations between the two powerful factions. Selka rolled closer to the window, taking in the view of the stars that seemed so far away, yet so close at the same time. "I needed a break," she said quietly. I'm struggling, Adrian. I feel like I'm losing control of everything." Adrian didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked over to her, offering her a chair, and sat down beside her. His presence was comforting, steady, and for a brief moment, Selka allowed herself to lean back in her chair and relax. "I know it's hard," Adrian said after a while. "It's a lot of pressure, especially for someone so young. And with everything going on, it must feel like the world is crashing down around you." Selka sighed deeply. "I've spent my entire life trying to prove that I'm strong enough, capable enough, but it never feels like it's enough. The Czarny's people don't see me as their leader, they see me as the broken princess who got lucky enough to survive. I'm not like my siblings. They had power, strength, influence, and now I have to fill shoes too big for me. How can I convince my people to trust me when I can barely trust myself?" Adrian listened, his expression softening as he took in her words. He reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of support in a world where emotions were often hidden behind layers of politeness and power. "You don't have to be like them, Selka. You don't have to fill anyone's shoes but your own. You're already showing your people what kind of leader you are. The fact that you're still standing here doing this says everything. People don't follow titles or expectations. They follow strength, yes, but more than that, they follow authenticity. They follow you because you're real." Selka glanced at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. For the first time in a long time, she felt herself breathe a little easier. Adrian's words had weight. He wasn't saying what she wanted to hear. He was saying what she needed to hear. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted. "I've never been prepared for any of this. I was supposed to be just a figurehead, someone who could be put on a throne but never actually lead. But now I have to step up. I have to make decisions that could affect entire worlds." "And you will," Adrian said, his voice firm. "You'll make those decisions, and they'll be the right ones because you're thinking about the future, about what's best for your people. The fact that you care so much about what happens next, that's what makes you a leader, not your disability, not your title, your heart." Selka smiled, a faint but genuine smile that felt like a weight lifting from her chest. "You make it sound so simple." Adrian laughed softly. "If it were easy, everyone would do it. But you're the one doing it. Every day, you're getting closer to the person you're meant to be. Just give yourself some time, and don't forget that you're not alone in this." For a long moment they sat in silence, the soft hum of the ship's engines the only sound between them. Then Adrian stood up and walked over to the desk, pulling out a small tablet. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, looking down at the device. "It's a new strategy the Terran diplomats came up with," Adrian said. "I thought you might find it interesting. We've been working on ways to get the Czarny's leadership on board with certain proposals, but there's been some resistance. I figured you'd want to see it." Selka took the tablet, skimming through the notes. As she read, her mind began to race. The ideas were bold, far-reaching, and exactly the kind of approach she had been hoping for. But there was one problem: the Czarny's leadership would never accept such drastic changes. "Not without a fight. I see what they're trying to do," she said slowly, looking up from the tablet. "But this approach is too radical for the Czarny's people. They won't go for it. It's too much change, too quickly. They'll resist it." Adrian sat back down, his face thoughtful. "Then what would you suggest?" Selka thought for a moment. "We need to start smaller, give them a reason to trust us. Let them see that we're not just making changes for the sake of it. If we can show them the benefits, the tangible rewards, they'll be more willing to listen." "Good thinking," Adrian said, nodding. "I'll pass it on to the team. You've got a sharp mind for this, Selka." She felt a small spark of pride. It wasn't often that anyone, let alone a Terran officer, acknowledged her abilities in such a way. But it wasn't just the praise that made her feel good. It was the sense that, for once, she had a voice in the decisions being made. She wasn't just a puppet on strings. She was part of the process. Later that evening, as they worked through the details of the new proposal, Selka found herself feeling more confident than she had in days. The weight of her position was still there, pressing on her shoulders, but now it didn't feel as heavy. With Adrian's help, she was beginning to see a way forward, a way that didn't rely on her fulfilling the role others expected her to play, but one that allowed her to step into her own. As the night grew late, Adrian stood up and stretched, glancing at the clock. "I should probably let you get some rest. You've got a busy day ahead of you tomorrow." Selka nodded, reluctantly standing as well. She felt a little sad to leave, even though she knew she'd be back the next evening. The days ahead would be challenging, but at least now she knew she wasn't alone. "Thanks, Adrian," she said, her voice soft. "For everything," he smiled. "Anytime, princess, anytime." As she left his room and made her way back to her quarters, Selka felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt since arriving on the regent's crown. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she believed she could walk it. The days were growing shorter, and the summit was drawing closer. Selka could feel the weight of what was ahead of her pressing down with every passing hour. The pressure to succeed, to maintain peace, to uphold the hopes of her people, it was overwhelming. The Czarny's empire had been on the brink of war for years, and now, the delicate peace treaty between them and the Terran Federation was the only thing that stood in the way of total destruction. She had thought that the hardest part would be making the decision to come to the summit, to take up her place at the negotiating table. But as the days wore on, she realized that the hardest part was yet to come. The real challenge would be convincing her own people that peace was possible, that they could trust the Terrans, that they could work together for a better future. Selka spent hours poring over the documents, the proposals, and the suggestions that had been sent by both sides. The proposals from the Terrans were bold and ambitious, but she knew that if she presented them to the Czarny's leadership without carefully crafting a way to ease them into the changes, they would never accept them. The Czarnys were a proud people, and they had spent centuries building their empire. They weren't going to just give it up without a fight. But as much as she wanted to protect her people's pride, Selka knew that she couldn't let the past dictate the future. If the Czarnys were to survive, they needed to adapt. They needed to embrace change, no matter how difficult it was. One evening, as she sat alone in her quarters, a knock at the door startled her. She was so used to the constant flow of diplomats and officials that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be alone. She rolled toward the door, unsure of who it could be. When she opened it, she found Adrian standing there, looking as calm and collected as always. "Princess," he said, giving her a small smile. "Got a minute?" "Of course," she replied, opening the door wider to let him in. "What's on your mind?" "I wanted to talk about tomorrow's session," Adrian said, walking over to the table where the peace treaty proposals were laid out. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about how the Czarnys might not accept some of the more radical proposals from the Terrans." Selka nodded. "Exactly. If we push them too hard, they'll shut us out. But if we're too soft, they'll see it as a weakness. It's a fine line we have to walk." Adrian sat down beside her and picked up one of the documents, scanning through it quickly. "You're right. The Terran proposals are bold, but I think there's a way to sell them, to present them in a way that will make the Czarnys feel like they're still in control." Selka raised an eyebrow. "How?" He leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "It's all about the presentation. If we frame the proposals in terms of mutual benefit, if we show them how this will help not just the Terrans, but the Czarnys as well, they'll be more likely to listen." Selka looked at him skeptically. "How can we make them believe that?" Adrian shrugged. "Well, for one thing, you've got a lot more sway with them than you think. You're not just some figurehead anymore, Selka. You're a leader, and you've already shown that you can think outside the box. What if you present the Terran proposals as a starting point, but suggest that the Czarnys add their own spin to it? That way, they feel like they're contributing, like they're in control of their own future." Selka considered this, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. She had never thought of it that way before. The Czarnys had always been so focused on their own power that it was easy to forget that they also valued their autonomy. By making them feel like the changes were their idea, she might be able to get them to buy into the Terran proposals. "I see what you mean," she said slowly. "But it's risky. If they think we're giving them too much freedom, they might start making demands that we can't meet." Adrian smiled. That's the tricky part, but you're a good negotiator, Selka. I know you'll find a way to make it work. She smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in days. Adrian's confidence in her was more than just a source of comfort. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. For the first time since she had arrived at the Regent's crown, Selka felt like maybe, just maybe, she could pull this off. The next day, the summit began in earnest. The Czarny's leadership filed into the grand meeting hall, their faces a mixture of skepticism and hostility. Selka could feel their eyes on her, and she straightened her back, trying to project the confidence that Adrian had so often shown her. She had been preparing for this moment for her entire life, but now that it was here, she felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Adrian entered the room beside her, and as they walked toward the front of the hall, he gave her an encouraging nod. It was the small things like that, his quiet support, his unwavering belief in her, that gave her the strength to keep going. When the meeting began, Selka addressed the room, her voice steady as she spoke. She outlined the main points of the peace treaty, emphasizing the mutual benefits for both the Czarnys and the Terrans. She saw the way the Czarnys' leaders shifted in their seats, their skepticism written across their faces. But Selka didn't falter. She pushed forward, explaining how the changes would not only strengthen their empire but also ensure its survival in a rapidly changing galaxy. As she spoke, she noticed that a few of the Czarnys' leaders were nodding along, their expressions softening. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give her hope. When she finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Then one of the older Czarnys' leaders stood up, his face hard and unmoving. "You think we can just accept these changes because you've presented them in such pleasant way?" he asked, his voice cold. "You think we'll simply give up our sovereignty for the sake of your peace?" Selka took a deep breath. This was the moment when everything could go wrong, but she was ready. "No," she said firmly. "I don't think you'll give up your sovereignty. I think you'll keep it while still working with the Terrans. We don't have to give up who we are to make peace, but we do have to adapt. We have to be strong enough to build a future that includes both our people and theirs." The room was silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Finally, another Czarnys' leader stood, his expression thoughtful. "And if we don't agree?" he asked. Selka's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. "Then we will risk everything, our future, our empire, and the lives of our people. We can either embrace the future together, or we can let the past destroy us." There was a long pause. Then slowly the first leader nodded. "You're right, we must find a way forward. Perhaps we can make this work." Selka held her breath as the room began to murmur in agreement. She could see the change in their eyes. The uncertainty was still there, but so was a glimmer of hope. For the first time, they were thinking about the future, not just their own power. The summit continued, but the tone had shifted. The Czarnys were still skeptical, still resistant to change, but they were listening. And for Selka, that was all that mattered. When the meeting finally ended, Selka was exhausted. She had given everything she had, and while there was still much to be done, she knew that the seeds of peace had been planted. As she left the room, Adrian was waiting for her outside. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes lighting up with pride. "Well done, princess," he said quietly. "You did it." Selka smiled back, feeling a mixture of relief and triumph. "We did it," she corrected him. And in that moment, she knew that the road ahead was still long and difficult, but it was no longer an impossible one. The final days of the summit were upon them, and the tension in the air had never been thicker. The Czarnys' leadership, though still hesitant, had agreed to the broad strokes of the peace treaty, but there were still countless details to be worked out. Every word, every action was being scrutinized, not just by the Terrans and Czarnys' leaders, but by the entire galaxy. One wrong move, one slip-up, and the fragile peace could come crashing down. Selka felt the weight of it all pressing against her chest. It was one thing to convince the leadership to give peace a chance, but it was another to get them to trust each other, to believe that this fragile hope for peace was something worth fighting for. She had done everything she could to make this work, but the final decisions were out of her hands. She spent hours in meetings with the Terran diplomats, going over the final terms, making sure every clause, every word was perfect. She spoke with the Czarnys' leaders, ensuring that their concerns were addressed, but no matter how much she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. It was on the fourth day, as the peace talks neared their conclusion, that disaster struck. A small group of Zarni's extremists who had always been opposed to the peace process launched an attack. They had infiltrated the ship, seeking to sabotage the summit and reignite the war. The news came through the comms, cold and clear. Intruders detected on Deck 7. All personnel to immediate lockdown. Selka froze, her heart racing in her chest. She knew this wasn't just a random attack. It was a calculated attempt to undermine everything they had worked for. The extremists knew how close they were to achieving peace and they couldn't let it happen. Adrian's voice cut through her thoughts. "Stay here, princess," he said urgently. "We'll handle this, it's too dangerous." But Selka shook her head, defiance burning in her chest. "No, I won't stay here. I'm not just a symbol, Adrian. I'm a leader. If we're going to survive this, I have to be with my people." Adrian hesitated, his face tight with concern, but then he nodded. "All right, but you stay close to me. We'll get through this together." With that, they rushed out of the room, moving quickly through the halls of the Regent's crown. The ship was in chaos, alarms blaring as security teams rushed to contain the threat. Selka kept her head down, staying in the shadows as Adrian led her toward the central command center. "We need to stop this before it goes too far," Adrian said, his voice calm but urgent. "If they can get control of the command center, they'll be able to shut down the entire peace process." Selka nodded. Her mind raced as they made their way through the ship, every step taking them deeper into the heart of the danger. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But with Adrian by her side, she felt a strange sense of courage, of purpose. As they reached the command center, they found a small group of Zarni's extremists gathered near the entrance, armed with blasters. They hadn't noticed Adrian and Selka approaching, and for a moment the two of them stood in the shadows, watching. "This is it," Adrian whispered. "Stay behind me, I'll take care of it." But Selka wasn't about to hide. She had been fighting for this peace since the beginning, and she wasn't about to let it slip away now. Without warning, she stepped out from behind the cover, facing the extremists. "Stop," she commanded, her voice clear and firm. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to destroy everything we've worked for." The extremists turned to look at her, their eyes filled with hate and suspicion. The leader of the group, a tall Zarni's man with a scar running across his face, sneered at her. "You think you can talk us out of this, princess?" he spat. "You've betrayed your own people, giving away everything for a false peace. We won't let you destroy Zarni's." Selka felt a cold chill run down her spine, but she stood her ground. "I haven't betrayed anyone. I've fought for our people. I've done everything I can to protect Zarni's, but this is not the way." The extremist leader laughed darkly. "You think the Terrans care about us? You think they want peace? They want to control us. They want to take everything we've built." "That's not true," Selka said, her voice rising. "We're building a future for our people, a future where we can stand together side by side. You don't have to do this. We can still stop this madness." The leader's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed like he might listen. But then, with a swift motion, he raised his blaster and aimed it directly at Selka. Adrian was faster. He moved in front of her, his own blaster drawn, and fired a single shot. The extremist leader collapsed to the floor, his weapon falling from his hand. "Get down," Adrian shouted, pulling Selka to the ground as the remaining extremists opened fire. The hallway was filled with the deafening sound of blaster shots, but Adrian returned fire with deadly precision, taking out one attacker after another. The fight was over quickly. Within minutes, the extremists were either incapacitated or dead, and the command center was secured. But the battle had taken its toll. Selka's heart was pounding in her chest, and her hands were shaking. The adrenaline of the moment was beginning to fade, and the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. "Are you okay?" Adrian asked, his voice soft but urgent as he checked her for injuries. Selka nodded, her face pale. "I'm fine, I didn't expect it to come to this." Adrian looked at her, his eyes full of concern. "You've got to be careful. We can't afford to lose you now. The peace talks are too important." Selka looked at him, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She had almost lost everything. She had almost lost her life, her people, her empire, but somehow she had made it through. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I couldn't have done it without you." Adrian's expression softened. "You're stronger than you think, Selka. Don't ever forget that." The ship's comms crackled to life, the voice of the Terran commander coming through. "All clear. The threat has been neutralized. The peace talks will resume in 1 hour." Selka exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. They had survived. The summit was still on track. They hadn't failed, not yet. As they made their way back to the summit hall, Selka's thoughts were a whirlwind. She had seen firsthand how far some were willing to go to prevent peace. But she had also seen how much her people, her allies, believed in the future they were trying to build. They were stronger than she had ever realized, and together they would stand against any threat. When they reached the summit hall, the leaders of both the Zarnis and Terran delegations were waiting. There was still tension in the air, but it was different now. It wasn't the tension of conflict, it was the tension of possibility. Everyone in that room knew that peace was within reach. They had fought for it, and now they were going to claim it. Selka took her seat at the front of the room, her heart still racing but her mind clearer than ever before. She looked over at Adrian, who gave her a quiet nod of encouragement. He had been with her every step of the way, and now, together, they would finish what they had started. The peace talks resumed, and this time there was no stopping them. The extremists had been defeated, but the real battle was in the hearts of the people. And Selka knew, deep down, that if they could hold on to the hope they had built together, they would succeed. Hours later, the treaty was signed, and peace was finally secured. Selka knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of hope for the future. She had done it. They had done it, together, and that was just the beginning.